person to serve in that role. He doesn't have that skill set.
Absolutely. What impact is that going to have on the project, do you think?
Well, I mean, serving as a PM, it's its own expertise. So if he's not of the right background, then all of the things that a PM is going to be asked to do in terms of marshaling resources, making sure that, various steps in the process are being managed properly from a budget perspective, marshaling the right resources, etc. He's not going to have the skill set to do that. He may not even know the importance of all of those key elements that are going to be part of his responsibility.
And what do poorly trained project managers at customer environments tend to do? I'm going to see if there's anybody with scars out there. What do project managers who actually aren't good at project managing tend to turn the project into when they're not very good at what they do?
A lot of times they dump it back on us.
Yep. Yeah. That's exactly right. Why do they do that? Well, because they start to vendor manage instead of project manage, right? So we had to define or define a procedure for dealing with these circumstances. So essentially, if I had to draw it out, I gotta use a different tool later. If you try and draw it out, one of the things that we had to work out was how would we deal with a project manager at a customer site who we wanted to be working kind of this way, dealing with their organization and working out resources and all that kind of stuff. But they make the decision, because they're not very good at what they do, that they actually are going to vendor manage and tell us what to do. Now, the way that we deal with this is we create a situation that hopefully creates a 180 and actually turns that person back around the other way. And we decided to do this by creating a series of lists and documents of the information and detail that we need from the customer. And we give it to the project manager all at once. We basically say, look, here are the 400 things that we need from your organization. We need you to set up some test environments. We need the test data. We need you to get these resources. We need you to get this. And we just basically gave them an exhaustive list of all the things that they need to do. The general mindset was to get them to stop vendor managing us. We do this all the time. We know how to get a project from start to finish. What we don't know is how ready you are to participate in that journey. So here's all the stuff that I need. Why don't you go off and get that for us? And that tended to work pretty successfully to actually get that kind of not very good project manager some guidance on the activities we needed them to achieve. And so if you're in that situation as a project manager, I strongly recommend this process tends to work pretty well. You can actually get a project manager that's intent upon vendor managing and actually get them to realize what we need from them is to marshal their own resources internally so that the project can progress efficiently and effectively. Great pickup there, Group 2. Group 3, Daniel, Howard, Jason, Kerry, and Ryan. What did you guys come up with?
We came up with an exhaustive list, and it's hard to pick one, but we're going to go with the solution engineer doing a design that they thought was right without having the final requirements from the customer, because Michael was running behind.
Oh, yeah, design moved into build without full requirements, right?
Right. So we thought the solution engineer should have talked internally to their program manager that they can't complete the solution design, explain the risk of moving forward without the final requirements. And then we wanted the program manager to take to the customer peer to explain what is going on and the impacts and risks.
So walk me through, right, because you're 100% right. That is the sign of trouble. The problem that most organizations have got is not that they don't see this as a sign of trouble, but they're actually not very good at finding a way to deal with it. So talk to me from a Vendavo perspective, right? What would we have typically done in your experience at Vendavo if we'd got to the point that design had finished, but the stage had consumed all of its resources, The design document was done, but we hadn't got all of the requirements, but yet we have to continue moving the project forward. There's a lot of pressure here to move the project forward. So what would we have done at Vendavo?
Would or should.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Would.
Shane, this one, it's a little, I do have a question on this one a little bit, because we're looking at areas where they failed to adapt to the environment, right? So this particular area that Danny and team brought up, to me, it seems like the team is trying to adapt to the environment, maybe adapt in where they shouldn't have. They should have stopped it, but they're trying to adapt to the situation where the requirements are not ready.
Yeah. So I would actually say that this is not an adapt to the environment. This is actually a know what done looks like, because this is actually the evidence of something not being done correctly. Yeah. So if you trace this back, what caused the design to not be ready on time?
Well, it was the requirement person with Michael. It goes back to Michael.
Right.
It seems to be a failure point project.
And Shane, you're not wrong, right, in that they're trying to adapt, but my point would be there, and that's exactly where I was going to go with the conversation, is that it's learning how to adapt in a way that is also safe, as opposed to a way that is dangerous. And so there's a couple of examples we can come up with in services. One is this example. You could come up with the example of also, how do you start a project without a signed SOW, right? Now, when I worked at IBM, IBM just tried to say, it never happens, don't do it. But what you learn in practicality is you can take that route and you can say, we don't do it. Or you can take another route that says, hey, let's get started, but you do it in a way that adapts and keeps yourself safe. So the way that you might do that with an SOW is just send a written email to the client that says, we're willing to put this amount of hours into the project without the SOW. But if you agree, then let's move forward. But if you don't get the signed SOW by that point in time, then we're pulling out and we're going to go work on other projects. It's going to be completely on you, and you now own the risk. So it's how we actually adapt that is important as well. And you're right, they tried to adapt, but they adapted the wrong way. So how would you adapt to this situation? Because really adapting here would have been, hey, Michael, you shouldn't do this job. This is, this is not something you do. You are not a trained professional at this. Even when we do it, it's difficult. I mean, we don't always get all the requirements out of the client. So why on earth would we let you do it? So to be honest, the adapt to the environment bit, that's that bit. This is now hey, knowing what done looks like, because now I have a design that does not reflect the entirety of what the customer wants to achieve. But I love this scenario, because we often look at it and say, well, he shouldn't have progressed. But you know what? Sometimes it's really, really hard to stop these things in these situations. And that's why I'm asking, what do we think we would have done if we were in the situation as Vendavo?
And this is a very common situation at Vendavo. So
it's a very common situation in all projects, right? To get to the consumption of the design budget, and yet we don't have a design. So I want you guys to tell me first, what would you guys have done?
Well, for me, this is a bit of a trickle down from where Jenny said that she wanted to go talk to the SMEs, and Michael said, nah, it'll be better if I do it. And the instant that he doesn't deliver on time, the first requirement, then you gotta push back and go, hey, dude, I'm gonna have to go have these conversations with them. You can participate if you want, but.
Well, I think we have to.
But Mike, the one thing that was a problem in that was he tried to get his the sponsor engaged, and the sponsor was telling me just didn't have control of the project. I think there was an onus on us at some point to start escalating on our side, on the services side. And so,
well, that's my point.
Yeah, I mean, right? Exactly.
When he doesn't deliver what he promised to deliver the first time,
yeah,
which was in opposition to what we wanted to do, then we have that come to Jesus heart to heart with him and say, look, dude, you're standing in the way. I can make you a hero.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Or hero. You can stand in the way and get run over.
Or I can make you a villain.
Even before that.
Remember, you couldn't get the divisions to engage. The divisions wouldn't participate. You have to get executive support to bring that in. I think when you have the come to Jesus discussion, he's going to say, look, I've asked, I've talked to our leadership, and then now it becomes a dual responsibility to try and get the engagement, get the other groups to start participating.
Yeah, and I don't think you have to wait until he's missing deadlines. Like the next sentence in the case study is Michael was soon having a difficult time gaining support from the operating divisions. Like you probably should have said something even before that, but like as soon as he's, that Jenny allowed him to go forward with that because his confidence made it seem reasonable. Like the very next sentence is like, yeah, it wasn't working. Like way before there were missing any deadlines there. There were warning signs, not just internally, but that Jenny could see. And like, I don't know if Jenny's boss was on like a 2-month sabbatical or something, but like that's one of the things that we point out is like Jenny basically like didn't talk to her boss for several months, as far as we can tell.
And there's a few reasons why the story is kind of structured the way that it's structured. One of the things that you guys just kind of talked through was a sequence of things all the way from the start of the project all the way through to this design appearing without the full set of requirements. And there are multiple environmental factors that weren't adapted to or escalated. And what I like to do is say that each individual read through that first part of the project and tell me at what point would you have escalated, like seriously. And one of the things that we need to start working on is feeling comfortable with escalating these environmental factors, because they're hard conversations to have. Michael needs to be on the project more time. Well, why is that? Well, because our historical experience says that if you put a project manager less than 75% on one of our projects, there's far too much work for them to get done. Well, how are you going to know? Michael's really good at what he does. Well, hey, maybe he is, but this is what I'm going to pay attention to. I'm going to pay attention to his timely delivery of deliverables. And the minute that he misses a deliverable, I'm going to bring that to your attention, and we're going to have to work out what the consequence of that late deliverable is on the project. And I'm going to transfer that to you because I have now told you I need a project manager 75% of the time. We can have these conversations. We just have to learn to really believe that these environmental factors end up causing a problem. And here's what I like about this approach. Let's say Michael's a genius and this thing just pulls off like a miraculous miracle. Awesome, we win. But guess what? We also won if he doesn't perform like we expect. We've pre-warned the client, and now we can go back and say, look, we're seeing that this thing is actually having an impact and we need you to help us change the environment. Otherwise, we're going to have to charge you more. This is kind of, if you're familiar with things, Pascal's wager, which basically says, if you win, even if you lose, you win based on how you actually create a certain bet. Pascal bet that the existence of God was real, but he said, if you don't believe it, then why not just believe in God? So that if you find out that you're wrong, you still win. There's a general idea here is that you can actually set up your environment so that even if you lose, you actually win, which is to pre-warn the customer about what the issues are within the environment on the project. If you don't have that conversation, then when you lose, and you're the one that ends up paying the price because you allowed the project to get into that circumstance. Now, one of the things that I want to talk about here is what did we do to try to perfect this situation? I think to Shinu's point before, this happens a lot, not just at Vendavo, everywhere. And that's actually kind of what my second book is about, which is project dynamics. But basically what we worked out was it's a very complicated series of dynamics. But essentially what happens in this moment is that we end up exhausting the design budget, but yet we don't have a design. Now, let's assume we're using waterfall, if that's the methodology that we're using. And to be honest, I don't care what methodology we use. I think it matters that we manage the methodology more than the choice of methodology. So let's say it's a waterfall method. What we decided to do was that it was an absolute not allowable condition to allow the project to move forward and to begin to consume build budget. Because once we start consuming build budget without a finalized design, we begin a double whammy effect. We consume more time than we wanted to actually define the scope, but at the same time, we're actually removing the time required to build the scope. So you're creating a situation that for sure is going to end up in trouble. So what we decided to do was to stand firm to say that we never consume build budget until the design is signed off. And we escalate that to the client immediately. And one of the things that we also found is that when we allow these designs to continue into build without any escalation, is there's another dynamic that occurs inside the project environment. It's something we call receiver's advantage. Essentially what happens is the person that has the greatest advantage in a negotiation within a project tends to go along with whoever is receiving the information or the product. So what that means in a project is at the beginning of a project, the service provider is receiving the information that they need in order to create the design. Once the design is created, the customer is receiving the solution back from the service provider. In both of those circumstances, it's the receiver that has the immediate advantage simply by saying to the provider, this is not what I wanted. The problem we've got is that when we get into the later part of a project, the customer uses that advantage really, really well. Is that what it looks like? That's not what I wanted. That wasn't what I expected. That isn't what I thought we were building. And then they push that back onto being our miss, right? Now, I'm not saying they win all of that argument. I'm just saying they have an advantage. So why don't we use that advantage in the early part of the project? And when we get the information or the design requirements from the customer and they're incomplete, why don't we say to them, this is not what I needed. This is not what I was expecting to get from you. This is not the data that we need in order to create a good design. If we use that receiver's advantage when we've got it, then we end up being able to get the client to pay more often for the extension that's required in the design phase so that we can protect the build phase. And that became our method for dealing with this issue. In fact, it got to the point where we actually wrote the method into our SOWs. Basically, the method was something we called stage budget control. And ourselves and the customer agree that in no circumstances should the current stage budget be allowed to consume future stage budget. Simple statement. Customer thinks we're capping the budget. That's not what we're doing at all. We're just saying that there's no way that we can continue into build until we finalize the design. We're not saying who's going to pay for it, so let's have that conversation. Who's held up this process more? Well, it looks like it's you. You need to pay for it. And we found all sorts of ways to get the customer on board with this when we got into those conversations, but we held to it firm and fast. I had, tons of these conversations and always got the client to pay for it because we had receiver's advantage. We had some clients that were unhappy about it. I had a CIO at one organization that kind of, went quiet on the call for the rest of the call once I made it clear that there was no way that we were going to fund their lack of ability to adhere to the timeline. But for the most part, it didn't really impact our customer satisfaction because we still had a whole project to repair any damage that did to the relationship. You see what we were doing? We're having a massively difficult conversation really early in the project so that then we could actually repair any damage that created throughout the rest of the project. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
So, and this is the kind of stuff that we want to talk about because it starts to hopefully get your juices, right, flowing with respect to how can I address the problems that we face at Vendavo. I don't have the answers for Vendavo. I have some answers and you might like them, or you might say, that's never going to work here. We're a unique snowflake, right? And if that's the case, then we've got to come up with some other answer. And we need you guys to put your heads together to work out how can I manage, manipulate, guide these dynamics on our projects, and then to start to develop best practices for them. And that's kind of what we're teaching you. We're teaching you all the best practices that we came up with. And I mean, for the most part, I'm trying to put them all into this project dynamics book, but have I got all of them? I don't know. We created so many kind of like little tricks, tips, and things that we would do to try and get projects to be successful. We were super successful at doing it, 97%. So the general idea is we need you. What we're really trying to do is to spur you as a consulting group to start thinking about things that way. So what I want to do now, guys, this is good. This is a great start. We got a lot of stuff out here. What I want to do is take the 10-minute break we said we were going to have so that you guys can kind of reset before we get into the next principle. So let's do that. come back and we're going to get stuck into principle number 7 as a way to get 2 principles done in one day. It's a great principle. You'll love it. It's all about you, the consultant, how to address a career in consulting. And then we'll move on from that. And then that'll get us into a good position to finish all of the 7 principles and the wrap-up session by the time we get to Christmas. Thanks, guys. I'll see you in 10 minutes' time.
Ready? Thank you.